The iron gates of the Nebraska State Penitentiary closed behind Tiffany Campbell with the same metallic clang she had heard every day for the past 13 years. Only now, the sound meant freedom, not imprisonment. The October wind pierced her cheap jacket, the only clothing she had been given upon her release, along with a bus ticket to Lincoln and a check for $200. The 42-year-old woman stood on the side of the highway, clutching a worn bag containing her few belongings. 13 years ago, she had been a young wife with dreams of a family. Now her face bore the marks of her years in prison, hard lines around her eyes, a wary gaze, a habit of keeping her shoulders tense, ready for danger. The bus to Lincoln took 2 hours. Tiffany stared out the window at the cornfields and small farms passing by. Nebraska had hardly changed, but she knew that she herself had changed dramatically. Prison had taught her to be cautious, to trust no one, to always look for hidden motives in people's words and actions. Lincoln greeted her with gray skies and the first signs of approaching winter. The city, with a population of nearly 300,000, was supposed to give her anonymity, a chance to start over. At least, that was what she hoped. The parole officer gave her the address of a cheap apartment in the southern part of the city and a list of places where she could find work. But first, she needed to see Ralph. Her ex-husband now lived in a 2-story house on Vineyard Street, the very street where they had once dreamed of buying a home for their future family. The irony was painful. Tiffany stood across the street, watching the house with its neatly trimmed lawn and children's toys in the yard. Children's toys. Ralph had a child. Her heart was pounding as she crossed the street. She had dreamed of this moment for 13 years, of what she would say to Ralph when she saw him. All her rehearsed lines evaporated when the door opened. Ralph Campbell had aged. His once thick, dark hair was thinning. Wrinkles had appeared around his eyes, and his belly betrayed his 45 years. But what shocked Tiffany most was the expression on his face. Not joy, not relief, but fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. "Tiffany," his voice faltered. "I didn't know you were all ready." "Out?" "Yes, out." Her voice sounded smoother than she felt. "Can I come in?" Ralph glanced into the house as if looking for support. "Now's not a good time. Maybe we can meet later, at a cafe or—" "Who's there, dear?" A woman's voice from inside the house made Tiffany freeze. She knew that voice. She knew it as well as she knew her own. Sandra was coming down the stairs. Tiffany's younger sister, who had written to her in prison every month for the first 2 years, then stopped. Sandra, who had promised to wait for her return and support her. Sandra, who now wore a wedding ring on her finger and looked at Tiffany with the same fear as Ralph. "Hi, Sandy." Tiffany was surprised at her own calmness. Inside, she was boiling, but years in prison had taught her to control her emotions. Sandra was as beautiful as Tiffany remembered her. Blonde hair, big eyes, soft features. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, which meant she had fulfilled her dream and graduated from medical college. In the 13 years that Tiffany had been in prison. "Tiffany, Sandra stopped next to Ralph, and he instinctively put his arm around her shoulders. It was a protective gesture that hurt Tiffany more than any words could have. "Mom, who's that?" A girl of about 12 peeked around the corner. She had her mother's light hair and her father's gray eyes. Ralph's eyes, which Tiffany had once loved. The moment of silence seemed like an eternity. "Grace, go to your room," Sandra said quietly. "But Mom—" "Now." Sandra's voice took on a steely tone that Tiffany didn't remember. The girl looked at Tiffany curiously and reluctantly disappeared into the house. "She's a beautiful girl," Tiffany said. "How old is she?" 12, Ralph replied, and his answer was like a slap in the face. 12 years old. That meant Sandra had gotten pregnant almost immediately after Tiffany went to prison. Maybe even earlier. "I see." Tiffany nodded, as if they were discussing the weather. "When did you get married?" Sandra and Ralph exchanged glances. "Tiffany, it's hard to explain," Sandra began. "Try." "You were in prison. We thought we didn't know." Sandra began to cry. "I was so lonely without you, and Ralph was suffering too, and you comforted each other." Tiffany finished for her. "How touching." "It's not like that," Ralph interrupted. "We didn't plan it. It just happened." Oh, it just happened. Tiffany smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Just like that night 13 years ago just happened, right, Ralph? Ralph turned pale. Tiffany, not here. Not in front of Sandra. Why? She's your wife now. Don't you have any secrets from each other? Sandra looked at them with growing confusion. What are you talking about? What night? Tiffany studied her sister's face. Had Ralph never told her the truth? Did Sandra still not know what had happened that night when Thomas Miller died? Ask your husband, Tiffany said. Let him tell you why I spent 13 years in prison. You were in jail for hitting a pedestrian, Sandra said quietly. You were drunk and... I wasn't drunk. The words came out softly, but with such force that Sandra recoiled. I've never been drunk behind the wheel. There was a long silence. Ralph closed his eyes as if in prayer. Tiffany, please, he whispered. Not now. Then when? When will be the right time to tell your wife the truth? Sandra stared at her husband with wide eyes. Ralph, what is she talking about? But Ralph remained silent, and his silence spoke volumes. Tiffany turned to leave, but stopped. It's a beautiful house, she said without turning around. The one we picked out for our family. Remember, Ralph? You said we'd buy it when we had children. She walked down the street without looking back, even though she could feel their eyes on her. She had dreamed of this moment for 13 years, imagining different scenarios, but the reality was worse than any nightmare. Not just betrayal, a complete replacement. Sandra had taken her place in his life, in his home, in Ralph's bed. She had given birth to the child that Tiffany was supposed to have. She was living the life that should have been Tiffany's, and Ralph had allowed it to happen. What's more, he was happy. She could see it in his eyes, despite his fear. He was happy with Sandra. Tiffany reached the bus stop and sat down on a bench. Her hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, a habit she had picked up in prison. She needed to calm down, think, decide what to do next. 13 years ago, she had sacrificed her life for Ralph. She had taken the blame because she loved him and because he had a job, plans, and a future. All she had was the desire to protect him. Now she realized what a mistake that had been. The apartment that the parole service found for Tiffany was in an old brick building on 27th Street. It was a one-room apartment with a leaky faucet and wallpaper that had seen better days in the 80s. But she had a bed, a table, a chair, and a window overlooking a parking lot. After 13 years in a 2x 3-meter cell, it seemed like a palace. Tiffany sat down on the edge of the bed and took out the only photograph she had been allowed to keep in prison. The picture had been taken 2 days before that fateful night. Her and Ralph in the kitchen of their old apartment, him hugging her from behind, both laughing at some joke. She was 29, he was 32. They were happy. Tiffany tore the photo in half and threw it in the trash can. The next morning, she went looking for a job. The list her probation officer gave her included several restaurants, a laundromat, and a cleaning company, all places where no one asked too many questions about her past. The hometown diner was located on the outskirts of a college town, not far from the University of Nebraska. It was a typical American diner with red leather booths, black and white checkered tile floors, and the smell of fried bacon that had permeated the walls over decades of service. "Looking for a job?" asked a middle-aged woman behind the counter. Her name tag read Dorothy, manager. "Yes, ma'am. I saw the sign in the window." Dorothy looked her up and down. "Any experience as a waitress?" "Yes, a long time ago." Tiffany braced herself for the inevitable questions about where she had worked most recently. "Are your documents in order? Social Security, Idaho?" "Everything I need." "Good. We pay $7 an hour plus tips. Shifts are 8 hours, usually from 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon or from 3 to 11 at night. We work 7 days a week with a flexible schedule. Is that okay?" Tiffany nodded. She was ready for any job. "Then come in tomorrow for the morning shift. I'll give you your uniform now." It was easier than she had expected. No questions about a criminal record, no background checks. Either Dorothy didn't pay attention to such details, or she knew what it meant to need a second chance. Her first day at work was a blur of exhaustion and stress. For 13 years, she hadn't talked to strangers at work, served customers, or handled money. Everything seemed foreign and scary, but gradually her memory returned, and her hands got used to trays and plates. "New here?" asked a middle-aged man, sitting down at the counter at the end of her second week on the job. Tiffany nodded as she poured him coffee. "What would you like?" "The usual breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast." He studied her face intently. "You're not from around here?" "I used to be. I've been away for a long time." Tiffany tried to keep her tone neutral. In 2 weeks, she had learned to answer questions without answering them. "Detective Michael Ryan, Lincoln Police Department." The man held out his hand. "But I'm off duty right now, just having breakfast." Tiffany shook his hand, trying not to let her heartbeat show. "Tiffany. Nice to meet you, Tiffany." Ryan was a pleasant man in his 50s with tired eyes and a touch of gray. "I often have breakfast here. My wife says my cholesterol is through the roof, but what does she know?" He smiled. "I understand. I'll bring you your breakfast." Over the next few days, Detective Ryan became a regular customer. He always sat at the counter, ordered the same breakfast, and tried to strike up a conversation. Tiffany responded politely but briefly. She didn't know if he suspected something or was just being friendly, but she preferred not to take any chances. In the evenings, in her empty apartment, Tiffany thought about Ralph and Sandra. She drove past their house several times, watching their lives through the lit windows. She saw Ralph mowing the lawn, Sandra hanging laundry, and the three of them getting into the car to go somewhere as a family. The perfect American family, built on lies and betrayal. Tiffany began to make a plan. At first, she just wanted to meet Ralph alone and make him confess to Sandra what had happened 13 years ago. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became that this would not bring her satisfaction. Too little, too late. Ralph had stolen 13 years of her life. The best years when she could have had children, built a career, been happy. Instead, she had been in prison, protecting the man who had replaced her with her own sister. "How's the new job?" Sandra asked. Tiffany turned around. Her sister was standing at the entrance to the diner, shifting uncertainly from one foot to the other. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked younger than her 39 years. "Fine," Tiffany continued, wiping down the counter. "What do you need, Sandy? Can we talk? I'm on my break." Tiffany glanced at her watch. She had 2 hours left on her shift, but the cafe was empty. "Dorothy, can I step out for half an hour?" Dorothy nodded without looking up from her accounts. The sisters sat down at a table in the corner. Sandra ordered coffee and nervously fiddled with a napkin. "I've been thinking about what to say to you every day," she began. "I've been preparing for this conversation for 13 years. And what have you prepared?" "Apologies, explanations, excuses." Sandra looked up. "But now I realize that none of that matters. You're right. Tiffany, I know I did a terrible thing, but I was young, scared, and lonely. I was 26 when you were arrested. I had just graduated from medical school. I didn't have money for a lawyer for you. I had no connections, nothing. But you had Ralph." Sandra blushed. "It didn't happen right away. For the first 2 years, I came to visit you every weekend. Remember? I wrote letters, sent money to your account. I remember. Then you stopped. Because I fell in love." The words sounded like a confession. "I fell in love with your husband, and I was ashamed to look you in the eye." Tiffany took a sip of coffee, considering her response. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw the cup in her sister's face, but prison had taught her to control her emotions. "Tell me about that night," she said finally. "What night?" "The night Thomas Miller died. What did Ralph tell you?" Sandra frowned. "The same thing he told everyone. You were at the bar, you drank too much, you insisted on driving. Ralph tried to stop you, but you wouldn't listen. On the way back, you hit a pedestrian. And you believed that? Wasn't that what happened?" Tiffany stared at her sister for a long time. "Tell me, Sandy, in all the years you've known me, have you ever seen me drunk behind the wheel?" "No, but have you ever seen me so drunk that I couldn't control my actions?" "Tiffany, what are you getting at?" "That your husband is lying," Sandra recoiled. "What do you mean?" "Ask him yourself. Let him tell you who was really driving that night." "Tiffany, please don't do this." "Don't do what? Don't tell the truth?" "Don't destroy my family." Tears welled up in Sandra's eyes. "I have a daughter. She loves her father. We're happy." and I've been miserable for 13 years. I know, and I'm sorry, but... Sorry? Tiffany leaned forward. You're sorry? You stole my life, my husband, my chance to have children, and you're just sorry. I didn't steal anything. You were in prison and we... What? You comforted each other? You fell in love? It was all so romantic while I was rotting in a cell? Sandra began to cry. It wasn't like that. We didn't plan it. We tried to fight our feelings, but you couldn't resist. Tiffany stood up. You know what, Sandy? I don't blame you for falling in love. I blame you for being so weak that you betrayed the only person who loved you. You're still my sister. No, I don't have a sister. Tiffany returned to the counter, making it clear that the conversation was over. Sandra sat there for a few more minutes, crying into a napkin, then left without saying a word. Family problems? Dorothy asked as she left the office. Something like that. Want some advice from an old woman? Tiffany shrugged. Family is the most important thing we have, but sometimes family can cause the most pain. The important thing is not to let that pain poison you from the inside. What if it's too late? Dorothy looked at her with understanding. It's never too late to choose forgiveness over revenge. Revenge destroys the person who plans it more than the person it's directed at. Tiffany nodded, but Dorothy's words didn't sink in. Maybe someday she could forgive. But 13 years in prison had changed her. She was no longer the naive girl who sacrificed herself for love. Now she was a woman who knew the price of loyalty and betrayal. That evening, Tiffany drove past the house on Grapevine Road again. The lights were on in the living room, and she could see the silhouettes of the family watching TV. Ralph was reading the newspaper. Sandra was helping her daughter with her homework. A normal evening for a normal family. But Tiffany knew that this idyll was built on lies, and sooner or later the truth would come out. The only question was how. The next day, Detective Ryan came in for breakfast again. "How's it going, Tiffany?" he asked, sitting down at the counter. "Fine. The usual breakfast?" "I guess. You know what? Make the coffee strong. It's going to be a long day." "Something happened?" Ryan shrugged. "Old case. Sometimes they come back and won't let you rest." He looked at her intently. "You're not one of those people who believes the past should stay in the past, are you?" Tiffany froze with the coffee pot in her hands. "It depends on the past." "Fair enough, but I've always believed that the truth has a way of coming out no matter how deep it's buried, even if the truth hurts innocent people. Especially then. Because if innocent people live a lie, they're not so innocent, are they?" Tiffany poured him some coffee, feeling her hands shake. Did he know something, or was this just a philosophical conversation? "Scrambled eggs, as usual?" she asked, changing the subject. "Yes, thank you." Ryan smiled. "By the way, if you ever need to talk to someone about anything, you know where to find me." After he left, Tiffany thought about his words for a long time. The truth has a way of coming to the surface. Maybe she didn't need to do anything. Maybe she just needed to wait. But patience had never been her strong suit, and 13 years in prison hadn't made her any more patient. That night, she made a decision. It was time to take action. 13 years ago, rain drummed on the roof of the Lucky Strike bar on the outskirts of Lincoln. Tiffany sat at a table, sipping a Coke, and watching Ralph celebrate his promotion at work with his colleagues. He had been promoted to senior mechanic at the auto repair shop. Their dream of owning their own home was finally coming true. "One more!" Ralph shouted, raising another bottle of beer. It was already the 5th or 6th. Tiffany had lost count. She had suggested going home several times, but Ralph waved her off. "Relax, baby. It's not every day I get a promotion." At midnight, Tiffany got tired of waiting. "Ralph, that's enough. We have to work tomorrow." Okay. He stood up unsteadily, swaying. "Let's go home to my beautiful wife." In the parking lot, Ralph reached for the keys, but Tiffany grabbed them. "I'll drive. You're too drunk." "Come on, I'm fine." He tried to grab the keys, but missed. "A man should drive. A man should use his head, get in the passenger seat." Ralph muttered something under his breath, but obeyed. He dozed off with his head against the window the whole way home. Tiffany drove carefully. The rain had gotten heavier, and visibility was poor. They were almost home when Ralph suddenly woke up. "Stop! Pull over!" "What's wrong?" "I feel sick, right now." He didn't have time to finish. Tiffany quickly pulled over to the side of the road. Ralph jumped out of the car and threw up right on the road. Tiffany got out to help him, leaving the engine running. Better? Yeah, I think so. Ralph wiped his mouth with his sleeve. Damn, my head is spinning. Get back in, I'll drive you home. But when they got back to the car, Ralph reached for the driver's seat again. I can drive now, I'm better. Ralph, no, you're still drunk. I said I'm fine. He raised his voice and Tiffany backed away. When Ralph drank, he became aggressive. It's my car, and I'm driving. Tiffany reluctantly walked around the car and got into the passenger seat. Ralph started the engine and pulled out onto the road, too fast for the rainy weather. Slow down, Tiffany asked. Don't teach me how to drive. They were driving down an empty street when a pedestrian appeared from around the corner. A man in dark clothes was crossing the road, oblivious to the approaching car. Ralph, a man! Ralph jerked the wheel, but it was too late. There was a loud thud, the sound of broken glass, and screams. The car stopped at the side of the road. The engine stalled. Tiffany jumped out first. The man was lying on the asphalt in a pool of blood, not moving. He was about 50 years old and wearing work clothes. Tiffany bent down, trying to feel for a pulse, but her hands were shaking. Is he dead? Asked Ralph, coming up behind her. The alcohol intoxication had worn off, his voice clear with horror. I don't know, we need to call an ambulance. Damn. Ralph grabbed his head. What have we done? It was an accident. He appeared out of nowhere, you couldn't have seen him. They'll test me for alcohol. If they find out I was drunk, Tiffany, they'll put me in jail. Ralph, calm down. We'll call the police and explain. No! He grabbed her by the shoulders. You don't understand. I already have one DUI. If they catch me again, it'll be a felony. I'll go away for years. Tiffany didn't know about the previous offense. Ralph had never told her. Listen, he said quickly, feverishly. You haven't been drinking today, have you? There's no alcohol in your blood. Ralph, what are you talking about? Tell them you were driving. Tell them you hit him. Tiffany recoiled. What? Are you crazy? Please, it's the only way. If you say you were driving, you'll get probation, maybe a couple of years at most. But if they find out about me... Ralph, I can't. You can. He fell to his knees in the rain. Please, Tiffany, I love you. We were going to get married, remember? If I go to prison, all our plans will be ruined. Tiffany looked at the man she loved, kneeling in the rain next to the body of the deceased. There was panic, despair, and fear in his eyes, and hope that she would save him. Tiffany, please. I promise I'll never drink and drive again. I promise I'll be the best husband. We'll get married as soon as everything is sorted out. We'll have children. We'll be happy. The rain was getting heavier. Sirens could be heard in the distance. Someone had called the police. Tiffany, decide quickly. And she decided. Because she loved him. Because she believed his promises. Because she thought that love meant sacrifice. Okay, she whispered. Present day. Tiffany woke up in a cold sweat. It was the same nightmare that had haunted her for 13 years. Rain, blood on the asphalt, Ralph on his knees, and her own voice saying, okay. Stupid, naive girl. She thought she was saving their future, but in reality she had ruined her life. Tiffany got up, made coffee, and sat down by the window. It was dawn outside. Another day in her new life was beginning, but the past wouldn't let her go. It was quiet in the diner that day. Dorothy had gone out on an errand, leaving Tiffany alone. Around noon, Ralph showed up. He looked tired and nervous. He sat down at a table in the corner, away from the other customers. We need to talk, he said when Tiffany came over to take his order. About what? About what you said to Sandra. She cried all night, asking what I was hiding from her. And what did you say? Nothing. I said you were just angry about our marriage. Tiffany poured him some coffee. A convenient lie. Tiffany, please, don't ruin my family. Your family? She sat down across from him. What about my family? The one we planned to have? That was a long time ago. We were different people. I was the same. You changed. Or maybe I just didn't know the real you. Ralph rubbed his face with his hands. Listen, I know I did a bad thing. I know I should have waited for you. But Sandra was there for me when I was going through a rough time, and I was in prison. For your crime. You agreed to it. Because I loved an idiot. Tiffany raised her voice but quickly regained her composure. Because I believed your promises. What promises did I break? Tiffany looked at him incredulously. Are you serious? You promised to marry me. You promised to wait. You promised you'd never drink and drive again. I don't drink and drive. But you do. I saw you last night when I was driving past your house. You were sitting on the porch with a beer. Ralph turned pale. Are you following us? I live in the same town. I have the right to drive on any street. Tiffany, this isn't healthy. You need to move on, build a new life. How about you? Did you build a new life on the ruins of mine? I didn't want it to turn out this way, but it did. And now you're happy. Ralph was silent for a long time, twirling his coffee cup in his hands. Yes, he said finally. I'm happy. Sandra is a good wife. Grace is a wonderful daughter. We have a normal family. Built on lies. What does it matter what it's built on if it works? That answer hurt Tiffany more than any insult could have. Ralph hadn't just betrayed her. He didn't even feel guilty. Did you tell Sandra the truth about that night? She asked quietly. No. Why not? Because it wouldn't change anything. Thomas Miller is dead. You served your time. Why ruin what we have now? Maybe because your wife has a right to know who she married? She knows. She married a good man who loves her. A murderer who let an innocent woman go to prison for his crime. You're not innocent, Ralph snapped. You agreed to it. No one forced you. You forced me, with your tears, your pleas, your promises. I was scared, but it was your choice. Tiffany stood up. You know what, Ralph? You're right. It was my choice, and I made the wrong choice. What do you mean? I should have let you take responsibility for your actions. But you didn't, and now it's too late to change anything. We'll see. Ralph grabbed her arm. Tiffany, don't do anything stupid. Think about Grace. She didn't do anything wrong. I think about her every day. I think about how she could have been my daughter. But she's not your daughter. She's Sandra's daughter. Sandra's daughter and a murderer's daughter. Ralph let go of her hand and stood up. I can see you're not ready to talk sensibly, but remember, if you try to destroy my family, I'll protect her. How? Tell the police I'm threatening you? If I have to, then you'll have to explain why I'm threatening you, and that will lead to questions about the past. Ralph realized he had reached a dead end. What do you want from me? Justice. Justice? After 13 years? Better late than never. After Ralph left, Tiffany stood at the window for a long time, staring out at the street. The meeting confirmed what she already knew. Ralph had no intention of admitting his guilt. He had built a new life and wasn't willing to risk it for some abstract notion of justice. But justice wasn't abstract to Tiffany. It was very concrete and very personal. That evening, Tiffany drove back to the house on Grapevine Road. This time, she didn't just drive by. She stopped across the street and turned off the engine. The lights were on in the house. Through the large living room windows, she could see a family scene. Sandra was helping Grace with her homework at the kitchen table. Ralph was watching TV and drinking beer. The perfect American family. Tiffany took out her phone and dialed the police. Lincoln Police Department, dispatcher. Hello, I would like to report an unsolved crime. I'm listening. The Thomas Miller case, a fatal hit-and-run 13 years ago. Pause. That case is closed. The perpetrator has been punished. The wrong person was convicted. I'm sorry, who is this? Tiffany hesitated. If she gave her name, an investigation would be launched. Ralph would be called in for questioning. The truth would come out. But along with the truth, Sandra's family would be destroyed. Grace would find out that her father was a murderer. Sandra would realize that she had spent 13 years married to a man who had deceived her from the very beginning. Hello? Are you there? Sorry, wrong number, Tiffany said and hung up. She wasn't ready. Not yet. The next day, Detective Ryan came back for breakfast. How's it going? He asked, sitting down at the counter. Fine. You look tired. I didn't sleep well. Ryan nodded understandingly. I know the feeling. Sometimes the past won't let you rest. Tiffany froze. What do you mean? Just general thinking. Although, he paused. We got an interesting call last night. Someone reported information about an old case, but then changed their mind. And people don't usually call the police just like that, especially about old cases. It means someone's got something on their mind. Tiffany poured him some coffee, trying to keep her hands from shaking. The Thomas Miller case, Ryan continued. Remember him? The fatal hit and run 13 years ago. No. That's strange. You're from around here, you should remember. It was a high-profile case. A young woman hit a pedestrian while drunk driving. Maybe I wasn't living in town then. Maybe. Ryan studied her face closely. The woman's name was Tiffany Campbell. She got 13 years for manslaughter. Tiffany put the coffee pot back in its place, fighting the urge to run away. You know what always bothered me about that case? Ryan continued. Tiffany Campbell had never drunk and driven before. She was a model wife, worked as a nurse, no problems with the law. And then suddenly, this. People change. Yes, but usually gradually. Here, it's as if she was protecting someone. Tiffany felt she couldn't take the conversation anymore. Excuse me, I need to go to the kitchen, she said, and quickly left. In the pantry, she leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Ryan knew, or at least he suspected. Sooner or later, he would get to the bottom of it. Maybe it was for the best. Maybe other people had been making decisions for her for too long. Tiffany returned to the living room. Ryan was finishing his coffee. Detective, she said quietly. Yes? What if I told you that Tiffany Campbell was really protecting someone? Ryan slowly placed his cup on the counter. Then I would say that justice has not been served. What if the real culprit is still out there, married, with children, living a normal life? Then I would say it's time to right that wrong. Tiffany took a deep breath. Even if it destroys innocent lives? Innocent lives have already been destroyed, 13 years ago. Ryan stood up, put the money on the counter, and headed for the door. At the door, he turned around. You know where to find me, Tiffany. After he left, Tiffany realized that there was no turning back. Ryan knew who she was. He knew she was innocent, and sooner or later, he would get to the truth. The call came into the Lincoln Police Department at 7:23 a.m. on Tuesday. A neighbor named Mary Parker reported strange screams coming from the Campbell home on Grape Street around midnight, but didn't decide to call until morning when she saw that the front door had been open for several hours. Detective Michael Ryan arrived at the scene at 7:45 a.m. Patrol officers Davis and Conroy were the first to respond to the call. They had already established a perimeter and called for forensic technicians. What do we have? Ryan asked as he approached the house. A man, 45 years old, found dead in the garage, Officer Davis reported. Ralph Campbell, a local resident. Preliminary cause of death is blunt force trauma to the head. Ryan nodded, pulling on his gloves. Something about the name sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. The garage was located to the side of the house, a separate building. Inside, it smelled of motor oil and metal. Ralph Campbell lay face down next to his workbench in a pool of blood. A heavy wrench lay nearby, also covered in blood. Time of death? Ryan asked the coroner who had arrived. Preliminary estimate is between midnight and 2 in the morning. I'll have a more accurate time after the autopsy. Ryan walked around the body, examining the scene. There were no signs of a struggle. Ralph had been struck from behind, fallen, and never got up. Either he knew his attacker and didn't expect to be hit, or he was taken by surprise. Where's the family? He asked. His wife is at the hospital, working the night shift. His daughter is staying with a friend for the night, Davis replied. His wife has been notified and is on her way here. Ryan stepped out of the garage and looked around the yard. The lawn was neatly mowed. Children's toys were stacked by the porch. An ordinary house of an ordinary family, where an extraordinary murder had taken place. At 8:30, Sandra Campbell arrived. She was in her medical uniform, her hair disheveled, her face pale with shock. Ryan led her into the house and sat her down in the living room. Mrs. Campbell, please accept my condolences. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions. Sandra nodded, wiping away tears. I understand. When was the last time you saw your husband? Yesterday morning, before work. I worked the night shift at the hospital, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Did your husband mention any problems? Threats? Conflicts? Sandra hesitated. He's been tense lately. Nervous about something. What exactly? My sister just got out of prison. Tiffany. Ralph was very upset about that. Ryan felt something click in his memory. Tiffany Campbell. The Thomas Miller case. The woman at the diner who had been so nervous when he mentioned the past. Tell me about your sister. Tiffany served 13 years for hitting a pedestrian. She was married to Ralph before she was arrested. I see. And how did your husband react to her release? He was afraid. Afraid she would try to get revenge on us for getting married. Was there any reason to fear that? Sandra hesitated again. Tiffany would come to our house. She would say strange things about the past. She hinted that Ralph was hiding something. What exactly? I don't know. Ralph didn't want to talk about it. Ryan wrote the information down in his notebook. Where is your sister now? She works as a waitress at the hometown diner. She lives in an apartment on 27th Street. After talking to Sandra, Ryan went to the diner. It was the start of the workday, and Tiffany was serving her morning customers. When she saw him, a look of fear flashed across her face. Tiffany, I need to talk to you. What's wrong? Ralph Campbell is dead. He was killed last night. Tiffany turned pale and grabbed the counter for support. What? How? We're still investigating. Where were you last night between midnight and 2 a.m.? At home, sleeping. Can anyone confirm that? No, I live alone. Ryan studied her reaction. The shock seemed genuine, but Tiffany was clearly hiding something. When was the last time you saw Ralph? The day before yesterday. He came here. What did you talk about? Tiffany hesitated. About the past. About our marriage. Was it a friendly conversation? Not really. Tiffany, yesterday you almost told me something important about the Thomas Miller case. Now Ralph is dead. Don't you think it's time to tell me the truth? Tiffany looked at him for a long time. Not here, not now. Then where and when? At the station, in an hour. Ryan nodded and left, leaving Tiffany standing behind the desk, trying to make sense of what had happened. Ralph was dead. Someone had killed him, and she was obviously the prime suspect. An hour later, Tiffany was sitting in Detective Ryan's office at the police station. The room was small and stuffy with fluorescent lighting and the smell of stale coffee. So, Tiffany, 13 years ago you took the blame for a crime you didn't commit. It was a statement, not a question. Yes. Ralph was driving. Yes. He was drunk. Yes. And you agreed to go to prison in his place. I loved him. I thought I was saving our future. Ryan nodded. And then it turned out he married your sister. While I was in prison, they comforted each other. That must have made you angry. Angry? Tiffany smiled. That's an understatement. Angry enough to kill him? No. The answer was firm. I didn't kill Ralph. But you wanted revenge. I wanted justice. They're different things. Sometimes people confuse them. Tiffany was silent. Where were you last night? Ryan repeated the question. At home. I watched TV and went to bed early. Did you see anyone or talk to anyone? No. Do you drive? I don't have a car. But you have a license? I got it back last week. Ryan wrote something down in his notebook. Tiffany, I believe that 13 years ago you were wronged, but murder won't right that wrong. I didn't kill him. Then who did? I don't know. After Tiffany left, Ryan met with the other detectives working on the case. What do we have? He asked Detective Martinez. Not much so far. Ralph Campbell, 45 years old, worked as a senior mechanic at Quick Fix Auto Repair. Married to a nurse named Sandra, has a 12-year-old daughter. No debts, no apparent enemies. What about the neighbors? We interviewed everyone on the street. Mary Parker heard screams around midnight but thought it was a domestic dispute. No one else saw or heard anything. Any clues? Forensics found several fingerprints in the garage, but most of them belonged to Ralph or his family members. There's one unidentified print on the murder weapon. The weapon? A wrench from Ralph's own workshop. The killer didn't bring a weapon with him. So the murder wasn't premeditated, Ryan thought aloud. Or the killer wanted to make it look that way. Ryan nodded. What about the wife? She has a solid alibi. Sandra Campbell was working the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. Lots of witnesses, security footage. And the daughter? She spent the night at a friend's house, the Johnsons. That's been confirmed too. So the family is above suspicion. Who else? Colleagues say Ralph had been nervous and distracted lately, but no one can recall any specific conflicts. What about his ex-wife? Tiffany Campbell. She has a motive but no alibi, but she claims she didn't kill him. They always say that. That evening, Ryan returned to the crime scene. The house was sealed off, and the family had temporarily moved in with Sandra's parents. Ryan walked around the yard, trying to piece together the events of that night. The killer had arrived late in the evening or at night. How did he get into the garage? The door wasn't broken. Either Ralph let the killer in himself, or the killer knew where to find the key. What was Ralph doing in the garage at midnight? Working on his car, meeting someone, hiding from someone. Ryan looked around the garage again. There were documents on the workbench, repair bills, orders for spare parts, nothing unusual. But in the corner of the table lay a crumpled piece of paper that the forensic team had somehow missed. Ryan unfolded the sheet. It was a handwritten letter. Ralph, we need to meet and talk. I can't keep quiet about what happened anymore. Come to the garage at midnight. No one else should get hurt. The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting looked feminine. Ryan photographed the letter and sent it for analysis. If Tiffany had written it, he would have direct evidence linking her to the crime scene. The next day, the results of the analysis showed that the handwriting did not belong to Tiffany. Moreover, the letter was written with the left hand, although the handwriting expert could not determine whether this was a natural characteristic of the author or an attempt to disguise the handwriting. Interesting, Ryan muttered as he studied the expert's report. Detective Martinez peeked into the office. Ryan, we have some new information. The neighbors remembered seeing a car on the street around 11 o'clock at night, a dark sedan parked 2 blocks away from the Campbell's house. License plate? They didn't catch it, but it was unusual for that neighborhood. Check the surveillance footage in the area. Already on it. Ryan returned to studying the case. He had 3 main leads: Tiffany with a motive for revenge, the unknown author of the letter, and the mysterious car. But something didn't add up. The murder appeared to be spontaneous. The weapon was taken from the scene and there were no signs of planning. But the letter suggested otherwise. Someone had arranged the meeting in advance. Maybe the meeting was planned, but the murder was impulsive. Ralph and the killer met to discuss the past. The conversation got out of hand, and someone grabbed the first thing that came to hand. But who wrote the letter? And what exactly did the author want to talk about? By the end of the day, Ryan had more questions than answers. Tiffany Campbell remained the prime suspect, but there wasn't enough evidence to arrest her. Meanwhile, the killer was still at large. Ryan looked at the photo of the crime scene. Ralph Campbell lay in a pool of blood, taking his secrets to the grave. But secrets have a way of coming to light, especially when they involve murder. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. Ryan was sure of it. The only question was how many more people would suffer before that happened. A week had passed since Ralph Campbell's murder, and Detective Ryan felt that the case was at a dead end. The fingerprint analysis of the murder weapon had yielded no results. The print was smudged and unidentifiable. The surveillance cameras in the area were either not working or had been turned away. "What do we have on the dark sedan?" he asked Detective Martinez. "We found it. The car belongs to Mark Wilson, who lives 3 blocks from the crime scene. But he has a solid alibi. He was on a business trip to Omaha, and we have receipts from a hotel and restaurants." "What about the car?" "It's been parked outside his house all week. A neighbor confirmed it." Ryan rubbed his temples. Every lead led nowhere. "Boss," Officer Davis peeked into the office. "You have a visitor. He says he has information about the Campbell case." An elderly man in work clothes entered the office. "Jerry Patterson," he introduced himself. "I live across the street from the Campbells. I heard you were looking for witnesses." "What did you see on the night of the murder, Mr. Patterson?" "I work the night shift at the factory and get home around midnight. That night, I saw a woman coming out of the Campbells' garage." Ryan sat up straight. "Can you describe her?" "Medium height, dark hair. She was walking fast, looking around all the time. It seemed strange." "Can you identify her?" Maybe. There wasn't much light, but I remember her silhouette. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Jerry shrugged. I thought maybe she was a relative or something. But then my wife told me Ralph had been killed, and I thought. Ryan arranged for an identification. Tiffany and 4 other women of similar age and build were brought in. Jerry pointed to Tiffany without hesitation. That's her. I'm 100% sure. After the identification, Ryan called Tiffany in for questioning. This time, the atmosphere was more tense. Tiffany, we have a witness who saw you leaving Ralph's garage on the night of the murder. Tiffany turned pale, but remained silent. We also checked your financial records. On the day of the murder, you withdrew $200 from your account. That's more than usual. What was it for? It's my money. You're not answering the question. We also found out that you bought gloves at a store on 14th Street. Why would you need gloves in October? Tiffany pressed her lips together. Tiffany, we have enough evidence to arrest you. This is your last chance to tell us your side of the story. There was a long silence. Then Tiffany took a deep breath. Okay. Yes, I was there that night. Tell us what happened. I wrote him a letter. I asked him to meet me in the garage. I wanted to talk about the past. What exactly? I wanted him to tell Sandra the truth about the Thomas Miller case, that he was driving, not me. How did he react? He refused. He said too much time had passed, that it would destroy his family. And what did you do? I said I would tell her myself, that Sandra had a right to know the truth. How did he respond? Tiffany closed her eyes. He said he was glad I went to prison, that it saved him from trouble. And then? I don't remember exactly. I only remember the rage. It was so strong that it clouded my mind. I grabbed a wrench and hit him. How many times? Once. He fell and didn't move. I realized he was dead. What did you do then? I tried to wipe away the fingerprints, but my hands were shaking. Then I ran away. Ryan wrote down her statement. Tiffany, do you understand the seriousness of the charges? I do. Do you regret what you did? Tiffany thought for a long time. I regret that Grace is without a father, but I don't regret that Ralph is dead. Why? Because he stole 13 years of my life, the best years, when I could have gotten married, had children, built a career. But you agreed to take the blame. Because I loved that idiot. Because I believed his promises. Tiffany was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. At the preliminary hearing, she pleaded guilty. The news of the arrest shook Lincoln. Sandra quit her job and moved with her daughter to her parents' home in Omaha. The house on Vine Street was put up for sale. Detective Ryan was finishing up the case when Sandra came to see him. She looked exhausted, aged 10 years. Detective, can we talk? Sure, have a seat. I want to know the truth about that night 13 years ago, about the Thomas Miller case. Ryan took an old case file out of the safe. What exactly are you interested in? Was Ralph really guilty? According to Tiffany, yes. She claims he was drunk driving. And the evidence? 13 years ago, the investigation was superficial. Tiffany confessed and the case was closed. But now, after reviewing the materials again, what? There are several inconsistencies. Witness statements are contradictory. The medical examiner found only traces of 1 glass of wine in Tiffany's blood, which she drank at dinner. So she was telling the truth? It looks that way. Sandra began to cry. I lived with a man who lied to me from day one for 13 years. Mrs. Campbell, your husband is dead. Perhaps it's best to let the past stay in the past. How? How am I going to explain to Grace that her father was a murderer? That Aunt Tiffany is in prison for his crime? Children are stronger than we think. She'll get through it. What about me? How am I going to live with this? Ryan didn't know what to say. Some wounds never heal. Tiffany's trial took place 3 months later. Considering her confession and mitigating circumstances, 13 years of unjust imprisonment, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In her final statement, Tiffany said, I do not apologize for killing Ralph Campbell. He stole my life and I gave him back what he took. But I do apologize to Grace Campbell for taking her father away from her. A child should not have to pay for the sins of their parents. After the trial, Detective Ryan met with his colleagues at a bar. Fair verdict? Martinez asked. I don't know. On the one hand, murder is murder. On the other hand, Tiffany already served 13 years for a crime she didn't commit. What about the Miller family? Did they finally find out the truth? Yes. Thomas's widow says she's glad. Now she knows who was really responsible for her husband's death. At least someone feels better. Ryan finished his beer and looked out the window. It was raining outside just like 13 years ago when it all began. Justice had prevailed, but at what cost? One family was destroyed, one woman was back behind bars, and one girl grew up without a father. But the truth had finally come out. And maybe that was the most important thing. Revenge and justice are a fine line. Tiffany Campbell crossed that line twice. Once when she agreed to take the fall for someone else's crime, and again when she decided to take justice into her own hands. Both times, she paid with her freedom.